Now this story is going to keep you awake. But before we start, let's do something important. Take a moment to drop where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. They say some rules don't need explaining. At Mercy General Hospital, there was one rule everyone knew, but nobody talked about. Never go to the fourth floor alone. Not during the day, especially not at night. Sarah Martinez found out why the hard way. She was 26, fresh out of nursing school, and desperate for work. When Mercy General offered her the night shift, the pay was good, too good. She should have realized. Night nurses at most hospitals don't make that kind of money. Unless there's a reason, nobody wants the job. Her first night was a Tuesday in October. The kind of cold, wet October that makes you want to stay inside and lock the doors. Sarah walked through the main entrance at 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, because she wanted to make a good impression. The lobby was empty, except for one security guard reading a newspaper and a janitor mopping the same spot over and over again. The elevator ride to the third floor was quiet, too quiet. Sarah noticed the button for the fourth floor was covered with a piece of electrical tape. When she asked the day nurse about it, during shift change, the woman just shook her head. "Fourth floor's been closed for years," she said, gathering her things quickly. "Maintenance issues. Just don't worry about it." But Sarah was the curious type, always had been. In nursing school, she was the one who asked too many questions, who stayed late to read patient files, who wanted to know the story behind every scar and every strange symptom. That first week went smoothly. Sarah handled the usual stuff, checking on patients, administering medications, dealing with the occasional emergency. The third floor wasn't too busy at night. Most patients slept through her rounds. The hardest part was staying awake during those dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m., when the whole hospital felt like a tomb. The other nurses seemed nice enough, but they all had this look in their eyes, like they knew something she didn't. When Sarah mentioned she was thinking about exploring the hospital, during her breaks, they exchanged glances. "Just stick to the third floor," said Jenny, an older nurse who'd been there for 15 years. "Everything you need is right here." "What about supplies?" Sarah asked. "What if we run low on something?" "There's always someone from day shift who can help," Jenny said quickly. "Or security. Just call security if you need anything from upstairs." Sarah noticed that the security guards always worked in pairs. During the night shift, she'd see them walking the halls together, never splitting up, never going anywhere alone. When she asked one of them about it, he just shrugged. "Policy," he said, but his eyes said something else. It was during her second week that Sarah first heard about room 47. She was in the break room, eating a sandwich and reading patient charts, when two nurses from the second floor came in for coffee. They were talking in low voices, but Sarah caught fragments of their conversation. "Found her in room 47 again. Third time this month. Should have known better than to go up there." When they noticed Sarah listening, they stopped talking and left the break room without their coffee. Room 47. Sarah made a mental note. That night, she decided to do some investigating. The hospital had a small library on the first floor with old records and newspapers. Sarah figured she could learn something about the fourth floor's maintenance issues. What she found made her skin crawl. The newspapers from 1987 told the story. Nurse Margaret Chen, 34 years old, had been working the night shift when a patient on the fourth floor went into cardiac arrest. Back then, the fourth floor was the cardiac unit. Margaret responded to the emergency, but something went wrong. The elevators had broken down. The stairwell door had somehow locked from the inside. Margaret was trapped on the fourth floor for 3 days before anyone found her. The patient died. Margaret died too, from dehydration and exhaustion. She'd been calling for help, banging on doors, trying to get someone's attention. But the fourth floor was soundproof, and no one heard her screams. After that, they moved the cardiac unit to the second floor and shut down the fourth floor permanently. Too many bad memories. The article said, too many staff members refusing to work up there. Sarah sat in the library until 4 a.m., reading every article she could find. Margaret Chen had been a good nurse, dedicated, the kind of person who would never abandon a patient, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The kind of person like Sarah. When Sarah got back to the third floor, she felt different. The halls seemed darker. The sounds of the hospital, the beeping machines, the humming air conditioning, the occasional footsteps, all seemed louder and more threatening. She tried to focus on her work, but she kept thinking about Margaret. 3 days, trapped on the fourth floor. 3 days of calling for help that never came. The next few nights passed without incident, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She'd be checking on a patient and feel eyes on her back. She'd turn around, but the hallway would be empty. She'd hear footsteps behind her, but when she looked, nobody was there. Other staff members started avoiding her, not in a mean way, but like they could sense something different about her, like they knew what she'd been reading about, what she'd been thinking about. Jenny pulled her aside one evening. "You've been asking a lot of questions," she said. "Just trying to learn about the hospital," Sarah replied. "Some things are better left alone." Jenny's voice was serious. "The fourth floor is closed for a reason, not because of maintenance, because of what happened up there, and what's still happening." "What do you mean, still happening?" Jenny looked around to make sure nobody was listening, then leaned closer. "People hear things, see things, especially nurses working alone, especially nurses who remind her of herself. Her, Margaret, she's still up there, Sarah, still trying to save that patient, still calling for help." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "That's impossible, is it?" Jenny asked. "You've felt it, haven't you? The cold spots in the stairwell, the elevator, stopping on the fourth floor, even when nobody pressed the button? The feeling that someone's following you." Sarah had felt all of those things. She'd been trying to rationalize them, to find logical explanations. But deep down, she knew Jenny was right. "What does she want?" Sarah whispered. "Help," Jenny said simply. "She's been trying to get help for 36 years. That night, Sarah couldn't concentrate on her work. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound made her jump. She found herself looking at the ceiling, imagining Margaret walking around up there, still searching for someone to help her save a patient who had been dead for decades. Around 2 a.m., Sarah was making her rounds when she heard it for the first time. A voice, faint but clear. "Help me." Sarah stopped walking. The voice seemed to be coming from above her, from the fourth floor. "Hello?" she called out. Silence. Sarah stood in the hallway for 10 minutes, listening. Nothing. She convinced herself it was her imagination, maybe something from outside or from one of the patient rooms. But she heard it again, the next night, and the night after that. Always the same voice, always the same words. "Help me." Sarah started avoiding the areas of the third floor that were directly below, where room 47 used to be, but it didn't matter. She could hear the voice wherever she went. Sometimes it was a whisper. Sometimes it was louder, more desperate. "Help me. Please, help me." Other staff members noticed Sarah's behavior changing. She was jumpy, tired, distracted. She'd stop in the middle of conversations, listening to sounds that nobody else could hear. "You need to take some time off," Jenny suggested. "Go home, get some rest." But Sarah couldn't leave. She felt like Margaret was trying to communicate with her specifically, like she'd been chosen for some reason. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in November. Sarah was working alone on the third floor. The other nurse had called in sick, and they couldn't find a replacement. It was just Sarah, the security guards, and a handful of patients. Around 3 a.m., Mr. Rodriguez in room 34 went into cardiac arrest. Sarah rushed to his room and started CPR, but she could see he needed medication, specific medication that wasn't in the usual supply closet. She called the pharmacy, but nobody answered. She called the second floor, but they were dealing with their own emergency. The medication Mr. Rodriguez needed was in the backup supply room. On the fourth floor, Sarah stood in the hallway, looking at the elevator, knowing what she had to do. Mr. Rodriguez was dying. Every second counted. She could call security, but it would take too long to explain, too long for them to find the right medication. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately, like the elevator had been waiting for her. Sarah stepped inside and stared at the button for the fourth floor. Someone had peeled off the electrical tape. The button looked normal, like it had never been covered at all. She pressed it. The elevator rose slowly, making sounds she'd never heard before, creaking, groaning, like it was struggling to reach a floor it wasn't supposed to visit. The doors opened. The fourth floor was completely dark. Sarah stepped out of the elevator and immediately felt the temperature drop. It had to be at least 20 degrees colder than the rest of the hospital. Her breath came out in small clouds. She turned on her phone's flashlight and looked around. The fourth floor looked like it had been abandoned in the middle of a workday. There were gurneys in the hallway covered with sheets that were yellowed with age. Medical equipment sat exactly where it had been left 36 years ago. Even the calendar on the wall still showed October 1987. Sarah walked toward the supply room, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. But as she walked, she realized her footsteps weren't the only ones she was hearing. Someone else was walking behind her. Sarah stopped. The other footsteps stopped too. She started walking again. The footsteps followed. Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached the supply room. The door was propped open, and she could see shelves full of medical supplies inside. But everything looked wrong. The supplies were scattered on the floor, like someone had been searching desperately for something. Sarah found the medication and grabbed several vials. As she turned to leave, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Her own voice. "Help me. Please. Somebody help me." But the voice wasn't coming from her mouth. It was coming from behind her, from the darkness of the supply room. Sarah spun around and saw her. Margaret Chen stood in the shadows, wearing a nurse's uniform from the 1980s. She looked exactly like she had in the newspaper photos, except her face was pale and her eyes were desperate. "Help me," Margaret said, and this time Sarah could see her lips moving. "I can't find it. I can't find what I need." Sarah's phone flashlight flickered and went out. In the darkness, she could hear Margaret moving around the supply room, searching through boxes and bottles, knocking things over in her desperation. "Please," Margaret's voice was right next to Sarah's ear. "He's dying. I need to save him. I need to find the right medication." Sarah realized what was happening. Margaret was reliving that night in 1987, still trying to save the patient who had died 36 years ago, still searching for medication that no longer existed in a supply room that hadn't been restocked since the floor was closed. "Margaret," Sarah whispered. The searching sounds stopped. "You can see me?" "Yes." "Then help me, please. I've been looking for so long." Sarah's phone flashlight came back on. Margaret was standing right in front of her now, close enough to touch. Her uniform was old and faded, but she looked real, solid. "What do you need?" Sarah asked. "Epinephrine for the patient in room 47. He's in cardiac arrest." Sarah looked at the vials in her hand. One of them was epinephrine. "Here," she said, holding it out. Margaret took the vial with hands that felt ice cold, but completely real. "Thank you," she said. "I have to go now. He needs this." Margaret turned and walked toward the door, but as she reached the hallway, she stopped. "The elevator's not working," she said. "The stairwell door is locked. I can't get downstairs to call for help." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She understood now. Margaret had been trapped on the 4th floor, not just physically, but spiritually, trapped in an endless loop of trying to save a patient she couldn't save, looking for help that would never come. "Margaret," Sarah said gently, "the patient in room 47. He died 36 years ago." Margaret turned around slowly. "No," she said. "He's still alive. I can hear him calling for me. Listen to me. It's 2023 now. You died in 1987. You've been trying to save him for 36 years, but you can't. He's gone." Margaret stared at Sarah for a long moment. Then her face crumpled. "I failed him." "No, you didn't. You tried everything you could. You gave your life trying to save him. But now, you need to let go." Margaret looked down at the vial of epinephrine in her hand. "If I can't save him, then what was it all for?" "You saved other people," Sarah said. "Before that night, you saved dozens of patients. And even now, you're still helping. You helped me find the medication I needed tonight. Mr. Rodriguez in room 34 is going to live because of you." Margaret looked up. "Room 34? "Yes, he's in cardiac arrest right now. I need to get back." Margaret smiled for the first time. "Then go," she said. "Save him." Sarah turned and ran toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she looked back and saw Margaret standing in the hallway, no longer searching, no longer desperate, just watching, peaceful. The elevator descended to the 3rd floor, and Sarah rushed back to room 34. Mr. Rodriguez was still alive, barely. Sarah administered the medication and called for backup. Within 10 minutes, he was stable. Mr. Rodriguez survived. He went home 2 weeks later, completely recovered. Sarah never saw Margaret again. She finished out her shift that night, then went to the hospital administrator and requested a transfer to the day shift. She didn't explain why. She didn't think anyone would believe her. But as she was leaving that morning, she ran into Jenny in the parking lot. "You went up there, didn't you?" Jenny said. Sarah nodded. "And you saw her?" "Yes." Jenny smiled sadly. "A lot of us have seen her over the years, but nobody's ever been able to help her before." "How do you know?" Jenny pointed up at the hospital building. Look at the fourth floor. Sarah looked up. For the first time since she'd started working at Mercy General, there were light